Maney could hear the thoughts of a few people that could see him, and they were saying all sorts of things to each other from the future about how amazing it was to see this high-level initiate in this place at this time, who did not seem to have the same abilities as everyone else did. He was an ordinary man. They were in total wonderment. There were few, if any, who knew what was really going on. Master Tso nodded at him before he left, first out of the store. Maney knew that he didn't really have to pay for the items he bought, but to be impeccable, he slid his card through the card reader and signed the printout. Master Tso's courier, working the cash register, gave him a knowing nod and wished him well. Maney then left the store with his entourage of Masters of Awareness, got into his car, and drove home to his apartment. When Maney got home, he listened to his answering machine, and there were 7 messages. He listened to them while he changed his clothes. And he noticed that the 7 messages recorded the state of perception in the world that day, his last day at the particular help desk, where so much had happened. And the worst message of all was around number 5, when he heard the ruffled sound of his mother's breathing about to let him go forever, and it hung up after 2 seconds. The 6th message was a message also from his mother, except she was ecstatic and there were others with her. The 7th message was also from them, but it sounded sullen and determined, now with an understanding of what they would have to go through. It was permeated with the sound of an understanding that everyone touched by the annihilation initiations had gone through or would have to go through, all of them. And in this way the expansion of awareness rippled out from one being to another, from one group to another group. "It's over," cried out Maney, and his soul was his catalyst. He was so relieved. Knock, knock. Came the sound from the door. Maney started to fix up his bedroom and put on clothes. Knock, knock. "Just 2 minutes," he yelled. Moving, then, towards the kitchen he saw standing the man behind the scenes. In his apartment. About 5 feet in. Breathless. "Holy shit!" screamed Maney at the top of his lungs. Maney didn't expect anyone that night. He had given his all. And he expected the all to know this and realize it. Time to rest, once and for all. But there he was, the man behind the scenes. "Why did you lose your job?" asked the man behind the scenes. "Gore. How did you know?" replied Maney. The man behind the scenes was tired. "I heard from our Ruchi," he replied. "Well, it was not what it seemed. It was hell," said Maney. Then he got some water and lit some incense. "My boss is a fool. A good man, but a fool," said Maney. "He knows nothing." The visitor looked down on the carpet. Maney's face, then, looked full of scabs. And when Maney looked into one of the mirrors, there, in his abode of couture, the Nameless One said, "Don't scratch him when you look into the mirror. Don't look that close." The man behind the scenes then began to talk to Maney directly. As he rested, he said it took time for him to understand the words of Maney. While he was saying this, they were listening to a song about Brooklyn sung by a female singer. Maney stared at him from his temple of the female, full of mirrors and couture, and his visitor began to change faces. He could see his mug turn first into Lucifer, the covering cherub of God, and then into a childhood friend, a psychologist, a scholar. Maney could see his face change within a few seconds. And the man behind the scenes said, "Wait, you talk too fast. Everything you say, it has to herald through time. And I have to watch it. I have to see it, witness it, scribe it." And then he held his forehead, and Maney understood. "I understand," said Maney. And the man behind the scenes then said he had a long day. And Maney went to the kitchen and brought him some water. "Thank you." And it wasn't much longer before the most tired, so tired man behind the scenes left, and Maney pondered upon it. On this, Maney's last hour. Shaking head, why was I visited now? Maney thought of himself. Shaking head again. And then he grabbed some water and drank, and wondered, will it ever end? And then he went to his place of rest and tried to lay down. What is heaven? asked the student in Tibet. And Master TB said, "In the first heaven you are a fool, and you make yourself beautiful and rich, but you have not learned to love one another, and so fighting still existed." And talking now, Master TB became unusually stern as he spoke. The second heaven is when you wish to learn to get to know one another from the beginning to the end and become friends, and you develop superpowers only through the passage of time, and your experience grows richer and richer. The third heaven is the best one of all, because only then do you know that the first two hells never existed, only the third one did, and that one was based on illusion. But Grandfather Time always had watery eyes, because he knew that the first two hells existence was possible, and how did he know about them at all? The dog is walking to the bar again. And he moves with so much unharmedness that an entire language is cultivated of hand movements, implied gestures, shrugs and nods. And every scene that the dog is possibly in is a reflection of what might be happening in all the other worlds, all at once, heralding through time. And a joke gets funnier and funnier every time a world ascends and reflects back upon its original plotting. The dog on his way to the bar. And Maitreya overshadowed Jeshua in Palestine, after he was baptized by John, which occurred after his 40 days in the desert. And Maitreya spoke through Jeshua, and together they were called Jesus Christ, and ever since then, their name has been profaned. Many help desks are on second floors, and sometimes on fourth floors. Sometimes help desk is on first floor, but seemed to be very rare. For many, there was never any help desk on the third or fifth floor, just like the jacks were always empty on the back of the cash register's base unit for the peripherals in the third or fifth slots, in the help desk where the role was Maney's supervisor. This is true. And the empty points, in the case of both floors and slots, represented to two spots where one could fall into hell, or one could go to deletion oblivion. Whether there were more null points was a secret of her role, who just shook his head sullenly as if in the moonlight with a dark cloak on if you looked at him as if you were going to ask. But in any event, the cash registers only had 5 slots. 5 slots for 5 initiations. And every day, Master Tso and Maney would have cashiers get on their knees and take out all of the plugs from the jacks from the ports and have them put them back in one by one, so they didn't accidentally rearrange them. Some mistakes they may make would be okay, but it was better to have some kind of consistency in the numbering and looking at things. The help desk talked to people in different eras of time. On the second floor, Harold told Maney goodbye, in a place where choo-choo trains went by, and Maney had tears in his eye. Part 3. That thou dost, do quickly. That thou dost, do quickly. That thou dost, do quickly. The nulls said, I am the nothing, the zero, and my brother is nothing, and we heard together about the UN thing, our sister who was also nothing, and we made allowances for her, and together we were for the quadruple null set. Many save as the help desk send, receive, sent, received, retrieved, the language of the help desk. Maney pondered the email chains going backwardly, forwardly, and forwardly backwardly, and some chains were forwardly and some chains read backwardly, and he heard the pings and the bleeps of instant messengers, and he thought how profound it all was as it related to manifestation system administrators, servers. That's right, I was doing something when you called. Maney just remembered why he was here. He was very bad at multitasking, and the help desk tested him tooth and bone, relentlessly all day long. And periodically you could hear snickers and outbursts of laughing cascading across the wide room's cubicles, especially at night. And it felt like all the workers at the help desk were working together, which of course they were, and they coded it all so that no one knew what they were doing. And they coded it all in another way, to document it all with tickets. Download, upload, that was the way they moved the awareness around, like Jacob's ladder. In help desks there were tables in the break rooms where people put coupons, and choo-choo trains ran nearby. Whenever Maney would walk by through and around the cubes, he heard sniffles and sighs. Customer service was different than help desk. In customer service, you needed them. In help desk, They needed you. We will transfer callers one way and another, sometimes even to each other. There is white noise in many help desks, and many in the help desk also needed their own help. Manny would call for help twice a day, every day. And in this way, he would eventually stir up a relationship with Saint-Germain people who do this job not all but most learn enormous patience and great skill with words. And at help desks, you often deal with so much negativity that you have to learn how to cultivate positivity in order to counter all the negativity and therefore control the call that you will receive without the use of force. Manny smoking with Joe. Your hair looks pretty, Julie said to Joe as she came onto her shift. Joe's eyes were serious as she tried to understand the register and pressed all the buttons. Too much information coming at me too fast, she thought. I brushed it, she said, and Julie stroked her back and tried to console her in the span of 10 seconds. She was about to leave, and Joe would be alone now, on her own. Manny and Joe Vastina went on smoke breaks together. She got to know him over the years while she still was married, and he never hit on her. It was possible he was closer to her than any of the other bartenders, except for Perinisa. As Manny was working up the courage to ask Joe out, he had the plan, for better or worse, to ask her if she'd be interested in chatting online. She said, "Yeah, I do that." And then he looked at her and said, "Cool." I didn't want to assume. You see, Manny didn't want to start a chat and get no response. It would hurt too much. "I'll ping you tonight when I get home," he said as they walked back into the bar so she could continue tending, he following her. That night Manny began to text her, asking her how she was at the bar. And she never responded. Why did Manny take a shot with Joe? Because he thought this was different. They had gotten to know each other, slowly. He was comfortable around her. One day Joe looked into his eyes and suddenly realized he was beautiful. At that moment, her eyes melted and her mouth looked sad. As the weeks and months went by, more and more often she looked as if she was going to cry when she was around Manny. Manny began to feel sadness in his heart for her. Once, around these times at the bar, when Joe was drunk as a customer rather than bartending, she told her friends Lanuki and Teresa at the end of the bar that there was this guy that she really liked, but why wasn't he hitting on her? What do you think? She asked them. Lanuki said, "Well, he's really smart." "I know he is." "That makes it even worse," she said. Manny was sitting about 10 or 12 feet to the left of them, hearing the conversation. Suddenly Joe yelled over to him and said, "Manny, have you met Teresa?" Teresa was a new bartender. Manny turned and looked at Joe and said loudly and lowly, "Yes, I have." And then Joe immediately returned to her conversation with her two friends. Later that evening, while Manny was out smoking alone, he heard Joe talking loudly to Teresa. They were halfway between the end of the bar and the back patio. Teresa said to Joe, "Why don't you just tell him what you feel?" And at that moment, they both looked out to the patio and saw that Manny was watching them. She didn't come out. As time went on, Manny could not allow himself to dismiss this something beginning to form. He wanted to give it a try. And so he opened his heart as well and as wide as he could, and he tried as best as he could to faithfully honor himself, his heart, and love itself. A week or so prior to this, he heard Joe and Key and Teresa talking, and understood it to be about him. "He's not going to do anything," he heard Key say. A few moments later, Joe came out on the back patio and started talking really fast, and smoking just as fast. She stood up, and Manny saw her start to come closer to him, closer than she normally got, but he saw her recoil. He was somehow unapproachable. He saw how much she struggled. She couldn't find a way to get to him. This was one example of so many, where Manny wished that he could flirt, at least, if the timing was right, if he knew that the woman was single. In this case, it wasn't really clear, for Joe had recently indicated she was seeing someone else. But even if she hadn't, would have he been able to say anything? Flirting was actually painful for Manny, because it didn't feel authentic to him. It felt strained, manipulative, and inauthentic. Exciting but inauthentic. And this did not feel real to him. Joe and her wingman on the back patio. Manny returned to the pub. He had heard that Joe was officially single. When he returned, and Joe learned of this, one Sunday when the co-owner Greer was bartending, he went to the bar early. Only a few minutes after it opened. After an hour and a half, he saw Joe coming to the bar from the patio. "Are there people out there?" asked Manny, surprised. "Just Joe. She is relaxing." Greer paused for a moment, then said, "I think she got here just before you arrived." There was something ever so slightly deceptive in her look and sound. Joe, as a bartender, had keys for the gateway to the patio. She could unlock them and sit there. She could have done this if she was texted, and had purpose to do so. Manny got ready and went outside. There she was sitting, texting. Manny asked her if he could sit down, and she said that was okay. In a little while, a man came, a little younger than Manny. The two of them rapped back and forth, and things of this nature were said in the conversation. "There's this guy that is driving me nuts. I'm training him. Is he cute?" he said. "Yes. Very cute," she said. There was a pause, and skew references were made that Manny simply didn't understand. She talked about half of the week. She had absolutely no obligation to her two daughters. She was free. "I told him, let's just try it," she said to the man. "See how it goes. Absolutely no commitment." And then there was silence. "It's going south," said the man. And Manny was extremely uncomfortable there at the patio table, looking up at the sun in different directions. "Well, got to go," said Joe. "Got to go too, so-and-so." And so they left. How on earth was Manny going to start a real conversation with her with some other man sitting there, totally invading the whole area as some sort of guardian? Man was nervous enough around a woman all by herself. One night soon after that, Manny was out on the patio with Joe. It was very late at night. He had a lot to drink since he was building up courage, and more importantly, was waiting for a moment when perhaps a natural conversation could develop between Joe and him. He wanted to stay, but he looked down and said, in a low voice, "I have to go to work." And then when he got back to the bar, she said, "I'm not cutting you off, but you said you should go to work, so I'm not gonna give you another drink, okay?" she said. And he said, "That's fine. Thank you. That's a good idea. Honestly." The next time he saw her, he said, "Thank you for taking care of me on Tuesday. I never normally get that hammered, but the crowd was driving me nuts." Joe Vestina then paused for a few moments, remembering how she had recommended he stop drinking so he could go home and get some rest, and made the connection that Manny considered this a caring or even loving act. So, perhaps finally she had found the way to show Manny she appreciated him. This was formulating in Manny's mind, this possibility of what she was thinking about just then. "Are you dreaming yourself into my life, or am I dreaming you into mine?" he wondered. Then he strove to open up his heart, to work up the courage, through time, to ask her out again. Joe, the third bartender he would try to ask out in paradise. And weeks later, he worked himself up, saw his entire life from beginning to end, saw himself melting into the sun, like wax, with the wings of Icarus. He wanted to be open, to be fluid, and dance. He got his house in order, and prepared his things. And he made himself ready, to give it a try. He grinned, he was ready. He had tasted death, been through the pits, and was ready to try. Why not? He was resolved. Joe Vestina Joe. A few weeks later, Joe walked outside to the back patio. Manny was waiting in the close corner near the TV. With his back to the corner, he had maximum feng shui. She walked to the far wall and kept her back to him. She began a conversation on her phone. And after 15 seconds Manny knew she was talking to him. Just last week he had told Ray Greer how he wanted to break the ice with someone at the bar, but he had so much anxiety, and was so shy. And he implied that Ray already knew whom he might be talking about. And she didn't deny that she did. For she had hinted before that Joe was interested in him. So he listened intently to what Joe had to say. And she said this: "I love you. I love you. I saw you breaking apart, and I was worried about you." And Manny thought, and remembered that a few days ago, he looked into her eyes with tears and desperation while Kalanuka sat near him in silence. And he was silent then, and he had no words for Key. He wished that she would open the conversation, make a move, break ice. It was too bad that Joe never knew the real reason he had tears in his eyes. He was in torment at Key's silence, sitting next to him. "You're breaking up." "I'm sorry, you're breaking up," said Joe Vistana, her back still to him, about 15 feet away, facing a wooden fence gateway. Manny looked to the sky in silence, pretending, listening, and waiting. The evening was lit by a moon, and it was quiet and reminded him of old fog and moths moving one way and another, telling secrets about islands and electricity secretly to one another. "I love you. You need to go home and go to work," she said. I'm sorry, you're breaking up," she said. And then she closed her phone conversation and started to march back to the bar. But Manny said, "Joe, can we talk?" And she said, "I'm sorry, what?" And he said, "Joe, can we talk?" And she said, "Okay, just wait until I clear out my customers." And he said, "Okay." And he waited 45 minutes, smoking and going back and forth and in and out from the patio, to and fro. Finally she came out and he said, "I like to people watch. What do you think about the idea of you and I walking together, at the shopping mall, you and I, just talking and observing, together?" And she said, "Oh, no, I'm not interested in that." And then he looked down, and said, "I'm in hell again." And after 2 seconds he looked up and said, "I apologize, I guess I misunderstood." And she said, "No, it's okay." And he could feel, in these final statements, a change in the atmosphere, a clearing of the still remaining mist in the night. There was still a static electricity, but the walls were down. And Manny could see all of the enemies that Joe had then rushed her back inside into the bar with her. He felt the mood change, the melody changed and clanked about, and lost itself to shadows and preordained fates weakly orchestrating. He was without words. He only knew he'd be walking back to his place again, silently, on his way. Ever cordial, with care, he paid off his tab and thanked Joe Vistana. He had given his best shot. The dog walked Symbol to the bar Symbol to get a Black Russian and played putt-putt and pool. Symbol, and when he did so he was harmless. Symbol imperfectly perfect, he could see without seeing, be without being, hear without hearing, do without doing, and he was living everything and he was missing everything and he was missing everyone, because with everyone, he was missing everything, because if he was with everyone, he wasn't with anyone, while he was everyone, so he wasn't missing anyone while he was missing everyone. Somehow, somewhere I will find you, somewhere, somehow I will find you. And the dog was faithful, and the dog was pure, and the dog always showed up at the door ready for putt-putt and golf, and remarkably waiting about. 3 empty pages. 2 women stood with bare feet at the top of the caduceus of wrapping DNA. They were naked and had wings. Their arms were outstretched. They were back to back and their hands were interlocked as they spun in upward motion. Manny drew this when he was in his second rehab. He wondered why the art lady never came over to help him or tell him his work was alright. "I guess I didn't need help," he said, with a half smile and half frown. In another world, familiar but forgotten, the dreamer of this dream was in heaven again, in a house built for him with caduceus. A black and brown dog that had strong features, and a hand wrote all these things down in a leather-bound book, with ink from a feathery quill. Quietly, his other hand holding his forehead, Wenawee Lisa. The first time Manny saw Wenawee Lisa, she was licking some candy seductively, looking at him with her head turned to the left as she stood in front of the register. And Mamie thought it was ridiculous and ignored it. Many years later, when Elle was divorced and had a son, when the other women started paying attention to him, when wee Lisa began to think Mamie was amazing, and she thought she would try harder to catch his attention. This started mostly once after a time when she was starting her shift and walking toward the register. When she realized he was staring right at her at the front of the bar, she literally jumped back 2 feet, and the man to her left said, "What?" And she said, "Did it look like I just looked at Satan?" With a big grin on her face. From that point on, Wenna began to make it clearer and clearer that she liked him. Once, she told him, "I like it when people get drunk." A few hours later, while slicing lemons in front of him, and he wearing white that night and staring up at TVs, she went ahhhhhhh in apparent frustration and then said to him, "Do you see why I like it when people get drunk?" At another time, not long before he made his one move, she was talking to a man at Mamie's right near the end of the bar, and she said, "I want to be with a guy, but he isn't responding." And then she looked at him directly and said loudly, "It's too bad, he really is a really great guy." It is worth noting a time when Mamie was in one of his worst places before the Habs, when everyone seemed to be making strange hand signals and communicating with one another as if they were their higher selves, communicating to one another from the future. At that time he saw one wee Lisa literally disappear for a split second, and reappear 2 feet farther ahead where she was walking, behind the bar. But back to the future, when Mamie finally worked up the courage to make for himself a new life, a possible new wife, he thought he would try to make his aloof behavior make more sense to Wenna. He explained that he was very shy. He then said, "Did you know I asked Janie out once?" And she halfway shrugged her shoulders, and sort of looked halfway to her left and back. Mamie just smiled, knowing that she knew damn well. "Did you know it took me 4 months to work up the courage?" They then finished that exchange, but Mamie waited for the right moment. He asked her if he could ask her something. She said yes, but it would be a little while. After 10 or 15 minutes she came back and said she was ready for his question. He asked her if she wanted to spend time with him outside the bar. She simply said, "Mamie, I just don't have the time." Mamie nodded. Yet to be denied 3 times, accepting fate, and lot. The only thing a man can learn from another man is how to drink standing up. Master's seeing ability was astonishing. His teachings were out of this world. He could distill very complicated seeming situations into very simply expressed concepts with words in short, clear statements. He taught that the female was the unknown. He taught that the male anchors the female, and when they cooperate intelligently together, the expansion of awareness is facilitated. At this time, the relationship between men and women is extremely distorted as a result of social conditioning promulgated by black magicians. Mamie and the dog was faithful, and the dog was fine, and he was drinking Black Russians, with putt-putt, and wine, and he'd always be round again, always be found again, being moment to moment, and seeing walkingly, stalkingly, drinking Black Russians, arcade putt-putt, and wine. Mamie finds Master Yacht again. Mamie met and became friends with Master Yacht, Dynamo, knowing him implicitly, based on the gentleness and cadence and beauty of his voice and words alone. And they began to get to know each other again, both forgetting, as best as they could, their friendship as it was in the past, when they rode the runaway train together off into the perceived hells many years before Mamie was ever born. They wanted to become new again. New friends. Mamie and Master Yacht did their best to act without pretending, evanescently as best as they could. Savers. The man behind the seemed lie, the man of action dreamed lie, the scholar wasn't what he seemed like. Lanukiki, one of the girls, to his left that he liked all of them, was sitting silent and deliberately with him for the first time. He had given her one of those looks for a second, the first time she ever noticed, a week before. She was a girl his age. She loved sports, her parents, and worked at a family Italian restaurant just a stone's throw along the same side of the plaza, off to the left of the pub. Maney knew nothing about sports except putt-putt and the beauty of golf courses and women's diving. At that time, someone that was leaving the bar made a compliment along the lines of "I really like you" to one of the bartenders while he was behind Key and Man. And either Wenna or Joe said, "Which one of us do you mean?" The man responded, "Both of you." And Maney barely laughed at his comment. And then, quietly, Key, who knew that Maney liked Joe because of the hive mind, said, "Oh no." Sarcastically, quietly, and interestingly slightly in Maney's direction. Indeed, just a week ago, Maney cast a look towards Key's eyes showing that he thought she was fascinating, that he was interested. But Key was, if it was even possible, even more shy than Maney around the opposite sex. And just as quiet. Neither of them knew how to talk unless someone else started a conversation. After a few minutes Maney was terrified, while Key rubbed her thighs fast. She, of course, had some wingman to her left. She didn't say a word. And Maney didn't have a word to say. At one point Wenna stood in front of them both, seeing that Key was sitting next to Maney, and said to her, "I don't know about that one." Later, when Maney's desperation was growing and he was done with his current drink, Joe came by and asked if he wanted another. Maney looked at Joe with desperation and conveyed his whole soul in sorrow, his eyes clearly delivering the message, "Save me." She turned white and pulled back away about 1 foot at high speed when she saw what she saw. It took about 1 full second for her to see what she saw. "It looks like crying," she said quietly to Wenna Lisa, as she looked at her, working the cash register, their backs facing him. "He's a crybaby," Wenna replied. He walked upon the stones, then cast himself down, born himself stupidity, walked among the damned, reaching up bloody hand, crying mortal man, fed upon death he knew, lift himself up, walked among gods, I am demons, their secret took up sword, he put their walk dust and clay. It moves over the water, silence so sickening took up the agony that I am terrified, solar galaxies stepped, demolition feet took the keys silently and hell, discovered infinity, remembered immortality, the great sorcerer rewrote his reality, Emmanuel recapitulating outstandingly, he was out on the back patio of the favorite pub. And after 30 minutes, she came out. She walked solidly, and had a smartphone in hand, and said thusly, "Honey, can you hear me? You're breaking up, pause, you're breaking up, wait, hey, did the kids come back to you're breaking up, honey, I saw you the other day, hey, you're breaking up, I can't hear you, I love you, wait. I can't hear you. I love you. I love you. You should go home and go to work." And just then, the dream recapitulated the fact that Joe remembered and told him what he needed to hear. Everything was in order. Excellent. Joe was in his heart. It wasn't over, was it? She loved him. A dark brown-haired woman was sitting 2 seats over to Maney's right. She was about 10 years or so older. Yuki was between them. "Aren't you gonna buy someone a drink?" she said loudly. Maney pretended not to hear her as he was talking to Yuki. "Who is the man in black?" the lady then asked Piri. "Does he come here often?" And Piri said, "All the time." "He comes here all the time," she said, with grandmotherly glasses. She was the sorceress with the eagle cape, but she was busy in the garden just then, working the cash register. And the woman who asked left while Wenna Lisa walked in to replace Piri. And right before Maney got his bill, Wenna said to Piri, "Tell me, I look pretty?" As they looked at the cash register right in front of Maney, about to change tills. "You look pretty," Perenisa said in a low voice, matter-of-factly lie, and Maney thanked them without thanking them as he left the bar noticeably and somewhat quickly, and he believed at that time that they were using code words for what he needed to tell Joe, who didn't understand why Maney never hit on her. She apparently felt undervalued, he thought, As he walked away on the sidewalk in the plaza on his 3-minute walk home, the parking lot off to the left, but he later came to know that it was not about Joe at all. It was about Wenna herself. As usual, Maney was overthinking things again. It was an easy mistake for him to make when riddles and codes were the rule in these kinds of situations, never the exception, he thought. The professional, blonde Maney's internet was down and he brought his laptop to the pub. When a wee Lisa was bartending and, due to who was sitting where, Maney had to sit down next to a blonde-haired woman that was, apparently, a friend of Wenna's. He later figured out that this was the same woman who had previously made comments like he's dating himself and who goes to a bar to read. The night a brown-haired girl a few years younger than him told him I hate you. She was a northerly woman that seemed to have a harsh, somewhat deep-sounding voice, commanding almost, like a manager in a corporation. She was clearly a professional, as women who expect to meet men who make a lot of money and have a controlling role in a relationship sometimes advertise themselves as on dating websites. This was to Maney's relative gag reflex, not the women, just the perception of a certain crass form of power, as if it was somehow something to spend undue fawning or submission in homage toward. She began to play with her hair. This had obvious significance to Maney. In fact, if it hadn't already been said, every single time Maney looked at a woman with almost no exceptions, they would almost immediately touch their hair, symbolizing their social image. This was amped up though. She wasn't just running her hand through her hair, she was teasing it. Maney didn't look at her. He didn't even know what her face looked like. He had learned, through many bitter years of experience, that he simply wasn't the kind of person that could small talk with a woman and win her over that way. Small talk with the agenda of winning over also felt like a compromise of his realness, a petty manipulation that he couldn't own as true to himself. Rather than embarrass himself and waste her time in the process, he simply acted in such a manner that conveyed no apparent interest. He realized that this was probably perceived as apathy, self-centeredness, or possibly even vanity. But he had no choice as far as he could tell. In this way, he accepted his fate and lot, in that moment. The professional then said something quietly to the air, and ended her statement with the word, slutfulness. She then asked a question quietly to Wenna, and Wenna looked at her and said, trust me. In a little while, Wenna was working on pouring a drink, and she stood about 6 feet away from Maney. Wenna said, he makes everything like a big chapter in his life. And the blonde said, I thought, you just date people and get to know people? And Wenna said, yeah, me too. Then, she began to talk loudly to Wenna about her day, and how brutal it was. She said, any lesser woman would have gone mad. After a brief pause she said, making certain to speak loudly and aggressively enough to be heard, crystal clear, by Maney, okay, where do I start? Let's start with douchebag. I guess he's like, too busy or something, she said as Maney was clicking and typing on his laptop, checking his favorite websites, after he asked for golf to be put on the TV above and in front of him. He's like, why yes. I would like to have lunch later in the week. Maney began to type what he was hearing, as he knew it was going to be a part of the book that he was beginning to write, but as he recapitulated everything that was being said just then, he began to already forget all of the words that were important. Finally, the blonde walked quickly away, and sat at the far end of the bar, about 25 feet away. Maney could hear her then move on to different parts of her day that were terrible. She mentioned her age, 36, which was the same age as Maney at that time. Maney thought at that moment that it was too bad. He didn't really seem null to get along with women that were younger than around the age of 50, unless they were in a relationship, a relative, or a co-worker. I wish he knew. Maney's heart beated, wordlessly. I wish I could show her how much I care. It doesn't even matter. I'll love you. I just wish I could break out of this armor. I wish I could talk with you. I wish I could show you. But how can our minds meet? Mainie's mind asked itself. Finally, the woman went to the jukebox and played 6 songs. He was unfamiliar with most of them. Here are some of the words. When you are young, you get sad, you get high. Honey, I'd die for you. I'm still waiting. Come back home. I have feelings for you. In your eyes. See the light in my eyes. I'm breathing deeper than I ever do. I want to love somebody like you. Take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Never walk a straight line even if I wanted to. Find me somebody to love. Okay, that's a little too much. Kryptonite. Wenner said when this last song came on, implying that the song would be far too clingy and repellent for a potential suitor. And then a 7th song followed which was smooth-sounding, but he couldn't recognize any of the words in order to search them up on his laptop. He was still writing what was happening around him. About a half an hour later, the blonde lady was talking again, using coded language called lady talk, which Manie had learned is a widespread phenomenon. He's terrible, Wenner said, regarding his how good is he with women? And he doesn't want to practice, either, said one of the men who may have been playing along in the conversation. Wenner was listening along while she worked with the cash register and glasses, and then turned towards the end of the bar where the man who was playing along spoke and she said, "What are you talking about?" "You just missed everything," said another man, a regular. Null. And then the blonde paid off her tab and left the bar. At the last moment she looked back towards the cash register, and Manie looked over at her for a fraction of a second. As a result she looked at him from the corner of her eye and then walked out the door, the sun still shining outside. Noteworthy, yet another woman sat down next to Manie about 10 minutes before this. She had short hair and was a bit shorter in general. Manie didn't even look at her while he typed. He saw no merit in escalating any kind of tension. "He's busy," he heard Wenner say, after they talked quietly. As always, as he wrote down everything, and throughout the whole thing, his heart was heavy, because they would never know how much he loved them all. But through the years, the pain was not as severe for Manie as it once was, accepting in these times of fate, and of lot. About 15 minutes later, with eyes becoming sad, Manie was recapitulating his encounter with Jo on the back patio when she was there with her wingman. When a wee Lisa was working with glasses right in front of him, and then said frustrated lie, under her voice, "So fucking stupid," after looking at Manie. About 10 minutes after that, when getting glasses out of the cooler directly in front of him, while he typed, "I fucking hate this place," she said in a low tone, quietly, in his direction, the sound of it flicking and entering his ears as if it was intended for him to definitely hear. She was sad, and felt like she was hitting a brick wall, and surveying her life like a mortician. And then 10 minutes after that, right in the middle of a conversation she was having with another patron, in mid-sentence, she turned to Manie and said, "You know, I love you," in a loud voice after Manie motioned to pay off his tab. When he said goodbye that evening before Jo would arrive, her face was indescribable. It was smiling but sad. It was highlighted with invisible tears, and a reckoning of some kind seemed to be emoting from her face. And Manie felt for her, his entire torso lit up, and he was feeling hers also. They were warm but somber, and darkly glowing, especially from the heart and shoulders, up through to the crowns. Immediately after he left, he sat down in front of the window in front of the building adjacent and west of the pub, typing on his laptop, remembering everything. That evening, completely unusually, Jo was 5 minutes early, so she saw Manie there before she entered the pub for her forbidden shift. "Go now," he heard a woman yell from behind him as he was walking away, though he couldn't positively identify her voice. When he turned back to look, all he saw was some other woman on a cell phone, talking in front of the building of the poker club to the east of the pub. The reddish-brown-haired woman. It was an afternoon, so it was probably a weekend when Manie was, as usual, drinking at the pub. Some of the older regulars were there, but with them was a woman that he just realized he didn't recognize. He didn't look straight at her, so he wasn't entirely sure. Later he went out back for a smoke on the patio and he saw her at one of the round tables talking with one or two other people. Sitting on a stool near the TV, he slowly and somewhat strangely turned to the woman. He looked straight at her and she looked back. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, and had reddish-brown hair. Maney found her to be perhaps just as attractive as anyone else, but he didn't look at her long enough to learn her face fully. But either way, he decided he shouldn't pursue this path. If he was going to take a chance on a potential all-in, he might as well pick someone closer to his age. Unless, of course, Berenice got divorced. He turned away and finished smoking his cigarette while music that he himself had played on the jukebox was playing from the speaker on the patio. He was alone and in silence, watching the TV screen, feeling a little awkward. When he went back inside, a few minutes later the woman sat a few seats down to his right. There was no one between them. "You over there?" she said loudly in Maney's direction. Maney looked to the left to see whom she was talking to. It almost sounded like she was casting her voice out to the parking lot, and he looked out the window to see what was going on. "You over there?" she said again, equally loudly. Maney again looked to the left, but then his moment of realization came. "Come on, suck it up," she said. And Maney paid off with Peary and left. Another afternoon flavored with unfulfilled potentialities and sadness at the bar for Apocalypse. Talking to Anjuso, I have this working theory. It's been my experience, and so therefore it is knowledge, and therefore power. I could be wrong, and there are always exceptions, but this simply has borne true for me. I can't disregard what I have learned. Why does it always have to be the male who asks out the female, and not the other way around? Because that's just how it is, Maney, said Anjus on the phone, who Maney talked to about women with. I say it's about power. See, here's how it works. If the man asks the woman out, he has to take full responsibility for the relationship. 100%. So as soon as anything gets rough, or takes a bad turn, he has to take the blame for it, and be doled duly with pain and punishment. It gives the woman full moral authority from the very inception to point the finger and say, "You did this. Now you will pay. Fix it, or it's done." This is how the female works to set it up. She won't even start a conversation. This rule is so hard and fast. If the man doesn't scamper around and make like he is taking something from the female won't play along. Because then she would have to share an even responsibility for the creation of the relationship in the first place. The female needs the man to be a jerk, apparently, or else there's no money in it. You know that childhood sing-song that goes like this? Girls are nice, made of sugar and spice. Boys are made of something and snails, and puppy dog tails. See, I used to believe that. It was in my bones. It was in my benefit of doubt, it was in my belief in something pure. But I just figured something out. That little expression? It ain't nice. And guess who came up with it? Now, there's only two ways that I know of that women will get involved in a relationship. 1, you chase them or tease them while they pull away from you until they finally give in and they give you something, their body as a sacrifice. The other? You start a fight with them. Yahtzee. Maney was pacing around his living room covered with mirrors and posters of 60s couture, women's fashion. There were wooden dowel rods lined up against the wall, which Maney would sometimes practice spinning with his hands. Christmas lights lined all the walls and corners on the carpeted floor. At times he'd step into the dining room, which had the most posters and a chandelier with 6 light bulbs, making it very bright. This room, he called the temple to the female, and it had 2 stands in the back corner where he sometimes lit candles or could burn incense. He would also pepper the room with perfume every once in a while. I'll tell you something else I've learned in recent years. There are 3 things that all women have. Do you want to know what they are? He said to Anjus. He waited for a response, and when there was none, he continued, a magic spell, a Morgul blade, and Pandora's box. And none of them choose anything. This is why you can't hold a grudge against any of them, things just happen through them. This is also why a female always feels morally justified in her actions, and why blaming them for anything immediately triggers a deadly response because they didn't do anything wrong and they know they didn't. The magic spell is how inexplicable things occur when a woman is interested in you. I've seen their eyes become glowing orbs. I've felt one touch my arm and send the vibration through my entire body while trying to convey how she felt about the song that was playing. It resonated for minutes. I've felt one rock my entire body with an exchange of energy from 15 feet away. I've seen a bartender play songs on the jukebox, and when I suddenly felt an impulse to look at her, she was in a strange pose staring straight at me with her hand on her hip and her head tilted slightly sideways and juice, I don't even have words for what I saw. She glowed invisibly, and my mind felt like it went through a blender. Now, the Morgul blade is why women are more dangerous than men. All women have one, and it causes severe pain. In some cases, the pain never seems to go away. The blade is invisible, and a lady can stab you with it at any moment. Even remotely. Even if you're not even in a relationship with them. And the worst part? Sometimes it just happens and no one knows why. Finally, Pandora's box is opened upon the initiation of any interaction with a female. You've said. Mani and Juice began to say. Mani said, I'm telling you man, alright, let's change the topic. How's it going with your latest girlfriend? Chatting with Master Yacht. Mani Aloha. Work is quiet for the first moment of the day and it could change at any second. I just feel to share with you right now. Not that there needs to be any particular reason, but I feel that, perhaps, you understand me better than most folks. Most folks don't understand me, I think. So I'm going to go back to my favorite topic, which forms a large part of my book, my relationship, or lack thereof, with the female. On that note, I think a lot of women think that I am very full of myself or self-absorbed, because they see me all by myself all the time, not even looking at them, and never flirting or acknowledging one iota of an attraction from me to them. Funny part is, I'm always paying attention, and the attraction is definitely there far more often than not. I've heard comments like dating himself, or it'd be nice to get laid once in a while, or, and there is a huge litany of all the remote flirting I've received but never direct dialogue, because the male is supposed to initiate communication, I suppose. But there's more to it, I think, and my book addresses some of it. Most recently, a slightly older woman sat a few seats away from me and pretended to talk on the phone, but was actually talking to me. And it was very sad, really. She talked about how she was interested in me, how she'd only be around for 5 more minutes, and then it turned even self-debasing. She said, I know I'm a lightweight, etc., etc. The point I'm trying to make is that they think I'm all into myself, when in reality, I'm about to have a panic attack whenever this happens. This, I believe, is how the whole meltdown happened with Jo. A girl that I did look at once sat directly to my left in silence. All she did was rub her thighs a few times. I think she's just as shy as me. But it was so awkward, because I felt that she wanted me to initiate a conversation. She only made one quiet comment indirectly over a half-hour period, but I was panicked. When Jo came over to see if I wanted a drink, I was frowning with tears in my eyes and I telepathically conveyed these words to her, help me. And she went white as a ghost and jumped back. She then turned to the other bartender and quietly said, it looks like he's crying, and the other bartender, who I also tried to ask out earlier, and although she declined, she has since been trying to tell me she loves me, but I'm so bad with women it doesn't even matter. Said, he's a crybaby. Mani null. I hope all that made sense, and that was just my lead up to what I'm about to say. But first off, I would like to thank you for caring, and thank you for listening to my dialogues. It helps me to release the pressure and share the more intimate parts of my life with someone who has ears to hear. So, thank you for taking that slice of your attention to hear me. I appreciate it very much, my friend, and I hope you are doing very well. Happy Thursday. Many. Okay, so where I was going with this, and this is something I have thought about a lot over the last year or so, and I was thinking about it this morning, and also about you and how you are doing. The idea of falling in love. Master so put it as the real meaning of the feeling of falling in love is having your needs met. Here's the rub. I feel like I already have all of my needs met. And if anything, being in a relationship with a woman would actually, if anything, infringe upon my needs. And as a result, although I'm very much interested in trying out a relationship with a lady, I seem to be incapable anytime since my 20s of falling in love with a woman. And I believe that women can sense this, and that is why they find me completely unapproachable. These are strong words, but this has been validated in my experiences over the last few years over and over again. They feel like they have nothing to offer me, or moreover nothing to hook me with. And this is, apparently, true. And so no woman has been able to stalk me into a relationship. And if I'm supposed to pick a woman, which one? Because I am attracted to most. So my approach has been to wait for one that sees me for who I am and actually tries more than teasing her hair to really make some allowances for my apparently unrealized and misunderstood shyness and fears. So I just wanted to try to express that. Not complaining, seriously, it's just one of the more interesting parts of my life. The art of the non-relationship. He noticed this girl, Joe, Maney did. And one day he saw when her demeanor changed, and her face became subtle, like a glowing reflection, when she looked at him and saw something. And he became self-conscious then, but he held his ground and waited. And that night their souls were together, and he woke up with a feeling of bliss, as if he had been with a long-lost love. And from that point on and on, she talked ever more obscurely, even using her friends like Kara or Shidea as proxies to say things loudly towards Maney from across the bar while she read her smartphone. He's wonderful. I love him. I can't wait to spend an entire day with him. The bar was full of cacophony, and Maney was trying hard to hear Kara yelling from the end of the bar, strangely with pauses between each of her phrases, as she read the smartphone. That's why I go home and go to work. It will get better, Kara said loudly, looking at no one, like a robot, seeming like she was taking instructions from someone as she spoke. Joe knew that Maney was a listener, and Maney wondered if he was making it all up. But you see, the women at the bar constantly used smartphones to update one another and get each other's advice. As a result, they had what could be considered something like a hive mind, and they were all constantly being updated with new information that cascaded between them. Maney fantasized that they were all his personal coven of witches, and he was their only man. Ha, he thought. Even if these women seemed to be indicating that they were madly attracted to him, for some utterly baffling reason or another, a relationship seemed impossible to manifest. Maney meets Master Uwo. Maney noticed someone at the pub within the last 2 or 3 years there, who at first only showed up every few months. He was bearded, and had an uncanny familiarity to him. He looked like a being presently occupying the office of the Christ, as represented in certain paintings, with light brown hair with a hint of red, and spherical, clear blue eyes. He was silent, and sat by himself. On a daily basis, not every day, but most days, Maney would invite the ascended masters to join him at the bar. He would say an affirmation, like on the radio. To all of you that I have called out to, I invite you tonight to join in my festivities. I will probably go to the bar. When finally Maney met this mystery character, he was baffled, and he shook in his boots. This man spoke in riddles. Maney would overhear things when someone would ask him a question, like if he needed a drink. This man said things like, I need to go home. The good man is at home, and I need to be there soon. And Maney began to believe that this was in fact Master Uwo. But how could this be? Maney thought that he himself was Master Uwo. But upon looking, Maney saw that this man, who said his name was Matthew, had a visage that looked closer to images that were painted that were said to be the spirit who walked with a man in Palestine over 2,000 years ago. And then Maney recapitulated his own face, and saw that it was indeed different. Maney's face was more fairy folk-like perhaps. And then he wondered, who am I? And he had no idea. I do know that my father once said that he thought that the red hair that I have in my beard may have come from some ancient Viking line. No one in my family has red hair, said Maney. And he remembered then, one of the few questions that Master Yacht asked him, was he Irish? And Maney said no, and he explained the same. You see, there was something to all that, and perhaps it had to do with the visitation of the spirit upon the body. It is the same for me. My father says the same. They have no idea where the red came from, said Matthew. Maney stood there, confounded. This one, tall he was, with those crystal blue clear eyes. He was a house builder, who aspired to build doorways and grandfather clocks. Acton, a landscaper, a house builder, and a carpenter. Maney asked him, do you know who Maitreya is? And Matthew responded, no, I do not. But I'll know him if he comes in here a lot. And the dog was diligent, and the dog was dutiful, and the dog was faithful, and the thou was everything, and the thou was no thing, and the thou was all and both, and the quadruple null set preserved it endearingly, endlessly, imperfectly, wool never lied. But in his account of what happened at Charlie's Inn, the thick-haired girl never really actually did come out and kiss him. That was something he dreamt upon a storm. The listeners, is there anybody there? Said the traveller, knocking on the moonlit door. And his horse in the silence champed the grass of the forest's ferny floor. And a bird flew up out of the turret, above the traveller's head, and he smote upon the door again a second time. Is there anybody there? He said. But no one descended to the traveller. No head from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, where he stood perplexed and still. But only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveller's call. And he felt in his heart their strangeness, their stillness answering his cry, while his horse moved, cropping the dark turf, 'neath the starred and leafy sky. For he suddenly smote on the door, even louder, and lifted his head. Tell them I came, and no one answered, that I kept my word, he said. Never the least stir made the listeners, though every word he spake fell echoing through the shadowiness of the still house from the one man left awake. Aye, they heard his foot upon the stirrup, and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence surged softly backward, when the plunging hoofs were gone. Walter de la Mare, 1912. Some stories are too raw and recent to tell, said Maney to himself, thinking of his conversation with Shade after Jovestina screamed at him and he backed out the door with the eyes of a deer in headlights. Just remember, I won't remember everything, he yelled. She responded, I know you won't remember everything. And that's why I don't want to see you. And then she went on to say every shift and time she was supposed to be bartending, and these were the times when he wasn't allowed to be present anymore, as if then. Shade had asked him that night, what are you? And Maney answered, everything. And then Shade asked him, what have you been through? And Maney answered, hell. And Shade asked a last question, what have you lost? And Maney said, I erased it. I don't remember. Then Shade told Maney a story, that his grandfather died and his 18-year-old son committed suicide both in the same year. And Maney shook his head. Just remember this one last thing before I go. All the negative people out there? Just drive them right out, Shade said, making a motion as if he was pushing something out of a wall with his fist. And then they hugged with one arm behind each other's backs. And Maney told him this is how Toltecs hug. And he completed the scene, bumping his knee to Shade's knee, foot to foot. And Shade said I love you. And Maney answered, I love you too. And then Shade left. allowing Maney to get 2 hours of sleep at dawn, but only after Maney confirmed that he had set his clocks that week at the help desk. Phones had begun to ring with no one on the lines. And phones would call other phones, indicating the name of someone who never dialed. And no one was on the line. And callers from outside would call in, and they would be directed to other phones as if they were someone else. And no one was on the line. And people would pick up, and the phones would then dial out. In this way, the awakening began through the perception of the annihilation initiations. Have you ever heard the song of such a haunting? Maney asked a caller at the help desk as they discussed this strange phenomenon. And the listener on the line laughed. I just talked to my team lead about it. It's a known issue. They are actively working a ticket for it, Maney then said, though himself baffled. And then at the help desk, he thought about Lisa, the time when she once said that his card was not accepted when trying to pay his tab. He was convinced she was testing his financial capabilities that night, and she seemed somehow surprised when he simply pulled out another card and said, try this one. She was also surprised when Maney remembered that night when he said he was surprised that his card failed the other day when I liked it when people were drunk. She said once, still recollecting another time, when Maney's friend Yuki asked for his Gino reward money and she said, no, loudly. And then she looked directly at Maney. This was the evening right after Joe yelled, go now. And she said, I was referring to something else. And then she gave Yuki his payout money and Yuki went on his way, tired. After this time, somehow, Maney and Lisa would sometimes have a different look in their eyes when they looked at each other's faces. She had an honest half grin, and she showed the light of the sun into his eyes, and his heart soared. He then gave her a quirky half grin, and she cut off her bullshit, all of this, for a half second. Time stopped, and their seeing each other seemed like 2 full seconds. Maney had waited for Joe, and drank 11 drinks of vodka, and spoke with the man behind the scenes, and they taunted each other. And Maney later learned from a warrior named Shade that Joe had tried to separate himself and that man behind the scenes by moving their drinks around, putting them one place away from the other at the bar. This had an unfortunate effect on Maney, for when he came back from the bathroom when he needed to go, he got the impression that the person he was talking to was mad at him, or, worse, hated him and thought he was crap. As a result, he moved in closer, wanting to say his last words to the man. And he did. And he called him a master of words, for he was. He was in an eccentric mood that night. The man behind the scenes that night said that Maney was operating from a different realm, beyond the ordinary. Maney acknowledged this, because, especially at the time, it was so. And after Maney had become very eccentric, deep in the night at the bar, Joe finally said, I'm cutting you off. You've had 15 drinks, and I don't want you to start to be trouble. After 2 minutes passed, Maney said quietly, paying off his tab and in a low voice, I didn't do anything, and then Joe started screaming at him. But you always draw people in and get them to fight. I'm not banning you from the bar, but never, ever come out on a Monday or Tuesday night when I'm working. And so Maney backed away with eyes like a deer in headlights and made a claim about memory and how it wouldn't be complete, and then turned around the doorway and spun away, lost. And now his heart was truly broken. Joe was correct in that night, he was teasing the man behind the scenes, but never, ever was Maney someone trying to cause harm. All he ever wanted was peace. And as was once said by then boyfriend of the Stork, Maney is harmless. And it is so. This, Maney himself considers, a most high compliment. This was the night that Shade came over, hearing the news, wanting to know if Maney was okay. Joe had told Lisa about all this, and she told Shade, who was closing his own bar. He was one of those male bartenders that used to live across from Maney at the late hour that it was. And they, Maney and Shade, when Shade arrived, had a conversation that was more of a poem. In the fresh, spring wet dawn. In the middle of the conversation, Maney showed Shade his apartment of Yule lights, and they philosophized. Shade warned him of Jover's dinner. He told him tales Maney did not know. Maney finally asked Shade, "So let me confirm, Jover's wants me to disappear from her life?" And Shade affirmed deeply, earnestly, honestly, "Maney, I'm telling you the truth. Yes." And Maney rent his heart open and said, "It's so sad though. A song unwritten, unheard." Shade said to Maney, "Maney, there are 10,000 women, fish in the sea." And Maney felt a new kind of hurt, quiet and wet in the eyes. "But Jover's will never be. And this saddens me." And they hugged and embraced and Shade left.